A most unusual portrait, especially for a world leader. Two things stand out. We are not seeing Kennedy's full face or eyes because he is looking down. He is not being shown with a steely gaze surrounded by his symbols of office, but as just a man, a thoughtful man. Aaron Shikler painted John Fitzgerald Kennedy in 1970, 7 years after his assassination. He worked with photographs and took guidance from Kennedy's wife, Jacqueline Kennedy. Looking longer at the painting, we notice more. It's almost monochromatic, muted browns and greys. Not only are there no symbols of office surrounding him, there is nothing surrounding him. He is literally alone in the painting, giving us an insight into the many moments of final decision that rest with leaders. Before we look further, compare it to some other portraits of American presidents. The first American president, George Washington, is portrayed with his sword by his side, a steely gaze, his writing materials nearby, and storm clouds clearing through the window. Zorn's portrait of Grover Cleveland retains the detailed surroundings, but they are less symbolic, allowing us to focus on the subject. Other presidential portraits are less cluttered. Herbert Hoover is shown simply with a globe by his side. Franklin Roosevelt is not looking at us or anyone else. Rather, he seems to be deep in thought, looking upward for inspiration. The thoughtful pose is there, but his face is clearly visible in side profile. John Singer Sargent's portrait of Theodore Roosevelt has the same brown-grey empty background as Kennedy's, together with the three-quarters pose. However, Roosevelt looks commandingly straight at us. Woodrow Wilson is also looking straight at us, but with absolutely nothing else but his face. Again, the muted browns. But Kennedy's portrait is significantly different. Like any good portrait, it shows more than just a likeness of the face. A quick photograph can do that. Instead, it tries to peer deeper. Shikler said of his portrait, "All I wanted to portray was a man who looked like he could think." To my view, he shows more than that. He shows the weight of responsibility, a pensive weighing of the possibilities, of the advice received, of the consequences of a decision. John F. Kennedy was in office for just over 1,000 days. Of all the things he did, his most profound legacy is what he did not do. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, Kennedy was under pressure for an immediate strike against Castro in Cuba. From now-released negotiations undertaken with the USSR's Nikita Khrushchev, it is clear that nuclear war and the possible deaths of 100 million Americans and 100 million Soviets were at stake. Maybe even the annihilation of life on Earth, depending on secondary effects and further escalations. Kennedy had just read Barbara Tushman's history book, The Guns of August, which had come out only that year. Kennedy had a deep interest in history and had even written his own Pulitzer Prize-winning history book as a senator in 1956, Profiles in Courage. Tushman's book covered the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. It noted the many missed opportunities by European leaders as they stumbled, seemingly inevitably, into World War I. During the crisis in 1962, Kennedy stalled, making a final attempt to avoid a war by sending his brother, Bobby Kennedy, to meet the Soviet ambassador. This was eventually successful, and nuclear war was averted. Aaron Shikler's posthumous portrait of Kennedy is memorable and arresting. His almost monochrome president is weighed down by office, yes, but also intelligent and thoughtful in dealing with complex issues and relationships. A man who listens, but who also synthesises a broader worldview which arose from his extensive curiosity and understanding of the world. A man who can evaluate when to stand up, when to step back, who can take advice on the measure of Khrushchev, who was able to interpret and respond in kind to diplomatic language and its nuances, who can assess weaknesses and strengths, who can look for common ground, agreed purpose, and who knows how to leave space for the adversary to escape. In the end, it was Kennedy that had to call it. All of his advisors could only advise and recommend. In the end, it came down to one man's decision: the awesome responsibility of the President of the United States. Although there's nothing to suggest Shikler had this in mind when he painted his portrait, to me the portrait is inseparable from that decision. Somehow Shikler gives insight into the loneliness, pressure, and ultimately humility of that moment. Shikler's portrait captures that man. Can you separate a painting from its subject? In other words, can you look at the artistic merit of a piece of art and then somehow keep that separate from what the art is about? That's actually a pretty big question. It's very hard for me to look at this painting of Kennedy that we've just gone through without thinking of his presidency and the things that he did. But a work of art does not exist in a vacuum. Our own response to it is the sum total of our experiences to date and what we think we've learnt, and that's what we see and put into our experience of that work of art. Big questions. Anyway, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.